and expanded. Inside Sources.
Yesterday, suspect in the murder of Charlie Kirk made his first court appearance. This was in Utah County at 3 o'clock. We talked about the press conference that occurred at noon, but 3 hours later, he appeared before a judge in the 4th District Court. This was Judge Tony Graff.
And this was virtually.
Case 251-403-576, State of Utah versus Tyler James Robinson. Could you state your name?
Tyler James Robinson.
You're exactly right. It was virtual, except for me. I was the only person in the courtroom. It was awkward, as you can imagine. But yeah, you're exactly right. Tyler was there. Tyler Robinson was there virtually from the Utah County Jail. It was weird because he was wearing it looked like a bulletproof vest or something.
It did, and I had a question about that too. And sorry to jump in over the sound. That's my bad. Still learning. But yeah, it looked like a bulletproof vest, but then I saw some other things online that it was a suicide prevention vest, which I don't even know what that means, except that it doesn't have strings on it. But he also didn't look like he had a shirt on.
Yeah, it looked like he was just wearing it like a tank top.
Yeah.
I don't know. But you know, if he is on suicide watch, Holly, they would restrict the clothing that he wears, and maybe that would be appropriate. I mean, he can't just be shirtless, so especially in court. So they wouldn't let him be shirtless in the jail anyway. But they probably put him in clothing that he couldn't harm himself with. Maybe it's even got like a secure zipper, so he can't take it off.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of ways that people can harm themselves with their clothing, and socks and shoelaces and things like that.
Yeah. So the chart. So we knew what the charges were going to be at noon. He does a virtual hearing at 3 o'clock, and the judge just asks him if he understands the charges. Is that correct?
Yes, and also says, I'm going to read the charges. And if you recall, that was sort of a long, arduous process. And I was standing at the podium. I should have sat down, but I was just stood there the whole time. So the judge read all 7 counts and read them. You are charged with aggravated murder in that on or about September 10th, 2025. You took the death of, Charlie Kirk under the following circumstances. And then he read each one, and he went through that 7 times, which was entirely appropriate.
Right.
You sometimes, if let's say you're charged with a less serious crime, the judge will say, do you know what you're charged with? Do you need me to read it? And people will say, no, I've got a copy of it here. Yeah. But the judge in this case, you can't take any chances on a death penalty case.
And he was also told, right, in some fashion, that he was facing the death penalty, that the state was going to seek the death penalty in this case.
Right, exactly. And so the judge says, here is what you're charged with. Then he went to bail, which is the conditions of your release. The state has said that because this is a death penalty case, they are going to ask for no bail, and the judge says, and I'm going to approve that. So in other words, here's what you're charged with, and here's where you're going to be sitting until this is resolved. And then question 3 comes up, which is, who's going to represent you? And that was my role, as we talked about, because
you are not representing him, just to be clear.
Right. I'm trying to get him an attorney and working with the county, who has been incredibly gracious in helping get that done, and contacting lawyers from around the community just to see if we can get somebody lined out, because you have to contract with those on an individual basis.
Right.
And it happens all the time in Utah. It's not uncommon. It's sort of pronounced in this case because of the notoriety of the case. It's not something I haven't done before. It's just something nobody's known that I've done.
So let's break it down again for the people who are listening. Maybe they're tuning in for the first time because they saw your face and your name yesterday. Why is the process have some extra steps to this?
Yeah, so in most counties, when you have a death penalty case, you have a public defender, and we have public defenders all over this place. But when you do a death penalty case, it's not like a normal case. There's much more work involved. There are experts involved, and you've got to get mitigation people, and they won't even let you do a death penalty case unless you have at least 2 attorneys. So we often sort of look at those almost a la carte. We're going to budget this case on its own, and so that's what we're doing in that case. We're trying to get a budget for attorneys, and it's. You also have to have what are called Rule 8 qualified lawyers. And unfortunately, call them death qualified. But you're qualified to do a death penalty case, which means, no offense to divorce lawyers, because my law partner is one, but if your whole practice has been family law, you're probably not Rule 8 qualified. You know what I mean? Or
sure,
if you do wills and estates.
Sure.
So and even if you do DUIs all day, you're not going to qualify. And I don't have the list here of everything, but you have to have tried X number of murder cases. You have to have at least been involved in a prosecution or defense of a death penalty case. So sometimes you might be second chair or third chair or something like that. And then there's a lot of what we call CLE, continuing legal education, specifically directed to death penalty cases. There's a little bit more than that, but you have to be qualified. It's called Rule 8 qualified. And there are probably 20 or 30 attorneys in Utah that are Rule 8 qualified.
Right.
I'm among that group. And then you pick from that pool. There may even be more than that, because not everyone who's qualified throws their name in the pool. They're
Right.
like, you might be qualified and say, but no thanks, I'm not going to take any case.
Let me ask you another question. So you said 2 attorneys have to do that. They both have to be Rule 8 qualified.
No, one.
Okay, one does.
And actually, you can have the combination of them like one has done this and one has done that,
Oh,
and so
interesting.
as a team they're qualified.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I think that's the rule. But anyway, they have to be Rule 8 qualified.
Okay.
And sometimes you can say, well, I need to take the classes, and you can appoint an attorney and say, by the way, you need to take the classes before this case goes too much further. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Because
Sure.
there's a high level of education you have to have for death penalty cases.
Right.
Because the rules are just different. Everything's
Right.
different.
Right.
I mean, we even in a regular murder case, it's treated like a felony case. You have 8 jurors. You go through the process. You pick the jury and whatnot. In a death penalty case, you have 12 jurors. It's the only crime in Utah. Now, federal cases are all 12 felonies, but in Utah, in death penalty cases, you get 12 jurors. And of course, we know under Utah law, a jury verdict has to be unanimous. So you've got to sell 12 out of 12 before you can be found guilty or not guilty. It's got to be unanimous, no matter what. But another very unique part of a death penalty case is that the jury, it's the only case in the criminal world where the jury decides the punishment. Usually you go through a trial, you say, jury says guilty, the judge says, thanks for your time, see you later, bye.
Right.
And then the judge says, I'll put you on probation, I'll send you to prison.
Right.
In a death penalty case, if the jury comes back, in any case, I'm not talking about this one in particular, and they say guilty, the judge will say, okay, let's start trial number 2 next week. And then you have a separate trial called the penalty phase.
Oh, interesting.
And
with the same pool of jurors.
Same pool of jurors, same judge, same lawyers on both sides. And then they hear evidence that wouldn't necessarily come out in trial, because now you're looking at punishment. And so things could come out that wouldn't be admissible at trial that could be in terms of punishment. For example, if a defendant had, he'd helped somebody cross the street, or that's a bad example, but he'd had some struggles in junior high, or he had done some good deeds, or he became an Eagle Scout,
mitigating circumstances,
things like that don't have anything to do with whether you're guilty or not, but they may have a lot to do with whether you're a good or bad person. And the contrary would be true. Maybe somebody could say, boy, I went to school with him and he cheated on his tests, or he was always in fights, or something like that wouldn't be relevant to guilt.
Pretty sure you're playing these down, but yeah.
But right, yes,
exactly.
But they might be, and I bet a defense attorney puts his mom on the stand. Yeah. Tell us about this kid. Tell us about what he's been through. Try to get to the jurors and get 1 or 2 that will say, ugh, I don't know if we should have, vote for execution. So, it's a tough decision you have to make.
Yeah. So I actually just learned a whole lot from you that I didn't know about that. So could the jury also come back, and we only have a few seconds, but could the jury come back and say, we're recommending life in prison without the possibility of parole? Can they do that?
Yes. They'll be given 3 choices.
Oh, okay.
And the jury decides.
Okay.
Like I say, it's the only crime where they do that. They can pick death. They can pick life in prison without the possibility of parole, or they can pick life, which in Utah means 25 to life.
Which means they could have parole.
After 25 years.
After 25 years.
Theoretically have parole.
Oh.
Now, I've practiced for 43 years. I've never seen a case like this where the person was granted parole, even if it was a 25 to life.
Interesting.
The State Department has been reportedly denying visas to people celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, according to the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Is that a step too far? We're going to talk about that after the break.
KSL NewsRadio.
One of the things I really enjoy about this show, Holly, is that sometimes we learn as much from our listeners as they do from us. And we were wondering at the last segment what it was that Tyler Robinson was wearing yesterday.
Yeah.
Because we were looking at this vest, this sort of odd-looking thing. I thought it was a bulletproof vest, and we learned that it maybe isn't.
We have a texter who told us that he was wearing an anti-suicide vest, which means he's on suicide watch. It's made of fabric that cannot be torn and does not have zippers or strings that can be used for strangulation or other forms of self-harm.
So we did. That's pretty close to what I guessed it
Yeah.
may have been. That's
Yeah.
interesting. And a couple of questions that we got also.
We did. So we had a couple that you already answered about jury selection. Is it going to make it harder because the level of detail that was released? But we also had a new one where a texter says, my question for Greg, why would these attorneys even want to take on this kind of case?
Yeah, that's interesting. And people ask me that all the time too. So I'll say this: if I was not working at KSL and somebody called me to take this case, I would jump at it. I wouldn't go seek it out by any means, because the pay on death penalty cases is not great. But if a judge called me and said, scored it, as they do periodically, will you just take this case? It's this or that. I mean, it would be so fascinating. It'd be so interesting on so many levels. And I know that sounds selfish, but I have had, I don't think I'm talking out of line here, because I've been calling attorneys and I get sort of three responses. One is not in
No
a million
chance.
years. I am not taking this case. My law firm doesn't need the publicity. Or I had one person who say, "Hey, I've got kids in high school. I can't have this." And then you get attorneys who are like, "Well, I can, but I don't know that this is." It's going to take a lot of time. I got to shut down my practice. I'm going to need a tremendous amount of money. And then you get people that will say, and I don't blame any of the attorneys, I'm not being critical. Some people will say, if you need me to, I will. But see what else you can find. So we're down to about 3 or 4 attorneys that are attorney groups rather. My wife and I used to practice law, and the other night we were talking, and she said, "You and I could do this case. It would be interesting to do it."
Yeah.
I mean,
Quit everything else in your life.
and make sure that nobody knows where you live. But
Right.
that's
So
the problem with it.
I do have a question. Yeah, right. Do they have, are there concerns for their public safety? I mean, this is so high profile. I can imagine that even the attorneys are going to be
Sure.
under scrutiny,
Yeah, just from my
under
own
threat even.
Right. From my own experience last night, I left the court, and for some reason, a number of people, including media outlets, thought I was the attorney.
Yeah.
And so the calls I was getting
my
were,
gosh.
I drove from Provo to my home in the Ogden Valley.
Yeah, don't say where it is anymore.
Right, yeah. But I was just getting these calls, and even some of my friends are like, "Scortis, what are you doing? Like, you're too old." My kids are like,
She
Dad,
thinks.
you're supposed to be dialing it back. Go, you're doing this KSL thing now. Don't practice. I'm like, no. I'm just helping somebody. But no, I think it would be a career, a very interesting case for a career. And I was at the DA's office and had the DA contacted me, but with the same thing. I would have said, "Sign me up.
Yeah.
I will do this case. I'd love to do this case." And I absolutely did not like doing death penalty cases as a prosecutor because I have mixed feelings about them. But
Yeah.
it's the law.
Yeah.
It's the law, and so I supported the law.
I have a relative of a friend, so not direct, but they did a high profile death penalty case. And one of the reasons, of course, my question is, why would you take this case? And their reason was, everybody deserves a good defense. In our system, we believe that you are innocent until you are proven guilty.
Yeah, and
not in the public court of opinion.
And I still do public defender cases for the federal government, or at least I did until we started my new career change. But judges would call you, and sometimes you just cringe, like, I don't want that case. But if you get called by a judge and the judge says, "Hey, we sure need some help on this case," what do? You say, "Yes, I'll take it." The pay's not great, the work's not good, and sometimes you make enemies. But that's what we do. If you're not practicing in the criminal world, you don't get the call. You have to be.
That sounds weird, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
If you're not practicing in the criminal world, it makes you sound like a mob.
Right. Yes. Right.
boss.
But I mean, my law partner who does family law doesn't get called, but I do, and I'm still on the panel for the federal courts when their public defenders have a conflict and they need help from outside counsel. We
have 2 more texts that we'll go to, so
Uh-oh.
I think we're going to push the Marco Rubio thing to the next segment. But look, this is one from a texter who said, "I've always been pro death penalty. And I know this case qualifies, but in your opinion, don't you think this is just going to add fuel to the fire that's dividing our country?" Look, there's a real conversation to be had around that.
Yeah, and I don't want to. I mean, I could see this case from both sides. Like I said, I would love to prosecute this case. I would love to defend this case. I think it's a defensible case on the death penalty because he's a kid. He's 22. On the other side, as a prosecutor, I can't think of a worse case. What he's done in the bigger picture, even besides the homicide, which was inexcusable and which was, if he did it, an act of cowardice, what it's done to our country. And I think as you can sort of weave that into your case if you're a prosecutor. But on the other hand, he's a kid who was 22-year-old who was radicalized and probably hasn't done other bad things in his life.
We have another texter who said Charlie believed in the law and everyone deserved a fair trial. And somebody also says, doesn't a confession, in quotes, but carry a heck of a lot of weight? And somebody said, are you guys going to talk about anything else? Because I'm tired of listening to this.
That's a good
That's
point.
Fair question.
I love that person.
Fair question.
Yeah, we're actually moving on pretty quickly from that.
No, we're not actually.
Well, that's true. We'll figure something out.
But we really do love the input from our listeners, and thank you for texting us. It's we didn't even ask you to text in, but so many of you have just said, "Hey, I want to weigh in," and that's really been great. So we did have another one, and this came in earlier, and we didn't. This is a question I can't answer. Speaking of fuel to the fire, why hasn't the president called for an end to violence on both sides? He's the president. That's his job. I can't answer that question for you.
Do not go down that road.
So I do have, there was one other one who said.
There was one of the questions that I did want to respond to.
Yeah, no, say it.
I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
You list a couple.
So it was, gosh, I got to find it. Hold on. It really was saying about somebody who was there, that they had somebody who was really
it was
close.
about Charlie Kirk, that he was
I said that. He
yeah.
believed in the law and that everyone deserved a fair trial.
And I think that he would have said, get him a good lawyer.
And Charlie
have a fair trial.
Charlie also believed in the First Amendment, and that's part of our discussion that we're going to have coming up in the next segment. So let me just share this really quickly. So this is somebody who's a former paramedic. My next door neighbor had 3 children in the front row standing next to the person asking questions. They witnessed the whole thing, and this person went over, had a nice conversation with the neighbors about trauma and making it or using it to strengthen yourself instead of using it where they've seen one bad thing and it can ruin the rest of your life. I've seen 5,000 bad things, so there's a way to deal with it. Look, there is, and sometimes it takes professional help to deal with it for sure.
We love our listeners. We love our texters.
We do. Thank you so much.
We'll be back in just a minute, and we'll talk about. We're going to pivot just a little bit from this. Stay with us.